I want to share with you 11 different points about seasoning your firewood. How do you season your firewood? How long does it take? We're going to talk a bit about that. Hey everybody, Chad Cruiser here with Health and Homestead. If you like this video, hit the subscribe button, hit the bell notifications, and share something down below. But number one, when you're looking to have firewood ready for your wood stove or for your fireplace, and I've already done some videos on these subjects, but this is specifically on seasoning it. One of the things is that you need it to be well seasoned, and often if you purchase your firewood, I don't purchase firewood because, at least I don't have to, because we have enough land here with plenty of trees, and so there's always wood, and I got more than enough to cut right now. But when you do buy it, what you're going to find out often, it's not seasoned. Actually, they may often tell you, the guys will say, oh, it's totally seasoned. We've had it sitting out for a year. It's good to go. And if you actually split one, put a moisture meter on there, you'll find out many times that it's actually not nearly dry enough. So that's point number one, is that when you buy it, often it's not going to be ready. And so what you want to do is you want to buy it plenty early. And if you have the money, buying a couple years in advance might help you to be able to have well-seasoned firewood. And then every year after that, you just need to buy once a year if you're the person who needs to buy. If you're cutting your own trees, that's another story. But number two is that it takes a long time to season your firewood. You don't cut down a tree and throw it in the wood stove and hope to have good results, because obviously you throw in some green wood in your wood stove, you're going to get creosote, you're going to have trouble. Number two is it takes a long time, but that length of time has many factors, and that's kind of what we want to talk about. Now, many of these points are actually common sense. I mean, if you think about it, the next point is that in certain regions, the wood is going to dry faster. If you live in one of the wet weather regions, you live right by the ocean, one of the maritime regions, it's going to take longer for your wood to season than it will in, the deserts of New Mexico. So that's kind of a very simple but obvious point. Depending on where you live, you can't just tell anybody this is how long it takes for your wood to dry, unless they're from your area, they're from your region, and they're telling you specifically what kind of tree that you're dealing with. They might be able to tell you very specifically, but obviously it's going to go faster in Arizona, New Mexico than it is in some of like Maine on the sea coast. So that makes a significant difference. The next point is that this one's kind of obvious also. What would dry faster, a large log or a small piece? Obviously a small piece would. So in saying that, this is common sense, but if you really need to kind of hasten the process, if you really want to speed up the process, cutting a bunch of very small pieces, they're not going to burn as long, obviously, once they dry out, but they're going to dry out faster. So if you're really in a pinch, in a bind, cutting a bunch of smaller pieces are going to dry out much, much faster. Another thing to think about is that the wood dries faster in the summer months than it does in the winter months. This also is just, many of these points are quite reasonable. They make perfect sense. But if you haven't thought it through before, this is new to you. I'm really talking to people who are new to the whole issue of heating with firewood. That's the main target audience here. And so that's something to consider too. And so often, depending on what part of the world you're in, if you're in places like Norway, it may be this way across the North America, often people will get their firewood if they buy it in the spring, in the early spring, and then they'll have it maybe ready by the fall. That is, if that wood was even somewhat seasoned by that point. Now, another key point that I've mentioned in the past is that, there's hardwood and softwood, and kind of the old idea amongst many people is you can only burn hardwood, which is just totally not true. Talk to somebody up in Alaska where all they have in certain regions or in certain properties is going to be softwood, and what do they burn up there? They burn softwood. And you say, oh, doesn't that create all kinds of creosote? People used to think that was the case, and it is true. If you're burning some green pine, you're going to have terrible trouble. But if you really let it season like you should, it should actually burn just fine. Is it going to burn as long as some nice solid white oak, black oak, or red oak? No, it's not going to, but you can still burn it. You can still heat your house well. You're just going to have to be chucking in more wood into you're going to have to feed it more often than you would if you were actually burning some hardwood. But if that's all you got, that's all you got. Now, the softwoods, the nice light softwood, is going to also dry significantly faster than the hardwoods will. So that's something to think about also. Depending on what you have is going to actually tell you roughly how long it's going to take in your region for your wood to dry. You know, and by the way, these are the kind of things that you'll read inside of your manual that comes with your wood stove. I know most of the time, especially us guys, when we get something and it has a manual, what do? We chuck it to the side, we put things together, and we get to work, right? But when it comes to something like a wood stove, actually looking into it, spending an hour and going through the manual from your wood stove is actually a very beneficial thing to do, because there's specific things about your wood stove that may be distinct from another wood stove or from the one you had 10 or 20 years ago. So it could be very wise. And actually these points are found in the Drolet manual that I actually have. And so another point to consider on this is that aspen, pine, spruce, and poplar, they're not going to be as dense anyway as the oak, like I said. These things may actually, if you cut them in the spring, they actually probably will be ready just after seasoning just that amount of time in the fall. You may be ready actually to burn those if you've split them, by the way. And that's the next point, is that split wood dries significantly faster than rounds. So you have a bunch of rounds all stacked up, and they will dry. The rounds will dry. How do I know? I've tried it. It does actually work, but it's going to take significantly longer than it will if you actually split it. So if you want your wood, in general, that's what people do. They split it as soon as they can and then give it that ample time to season. Now, speaking of the hardwoods, though, things like the white oak, black oak, probably red oak, and other hardwoods, you're probably going to take at least a year after splitting it for it to be ready. And some of the wood can be so dense that it will take up to 2 years. And you're just going to have to figure that out. You can talk to the people in your region or simply find out from your own experience how long it ends up taking. Now, another point that Drolet points out is that having your wood out in the open, especially having it in an area where the sun can hit it, is going to help it dry faster than if you have it maybe under the tree canopy or in an area that's totally covered. And what they point out, which I think is a good point, that often we think we'll throw it in a shed, it's really dry in there, that's really going to help. And what they point out is that it actually takes significantly longer in there, probably, unless maybe if it's vented very well, it might work. But in general, keeping it in a confined space is going to hold in that humidity. So if you really want it to do the best, having it out in the open, I mean, having some kind of cover over it can be very good, because even when I have, sometimes the wind blows over some of my cover, as a result, the snow gets on it, and it's gonna, obviously it'll take longer. Now, some people don't cover them at all, and you'll probably get by just fine with that, but it will take a bit longer if it's not covered. So I like to cover it as much as I possibly can. And this tarp right here, somebody gave to me as just kind of a gift. They gave it. It's actually a little massive billboard sign, and so I use this to cover my firewood. Now, the 11th point is one that I've mentioned before, is that the moisture that in general you're going to want to get your wood down to is a moisture content of about under 20%, somewhere under 20%. They typically say 15 to 20% moisture rate is what you want to get. If you haven't seen my video on how to gauge the moisture in your wood, I go into several things other than a moisture meter. A moisture meter is the best way to know. I mean, it's the kind of guaranteed way to know, but there's ways that you can figure it out even if you don't have a moisture meter. And you might be thinking that those things must be expensive. This one was like $12 on Amazon. You know, it's not that big of a deal. So if you're interested, I have an affiliate link below. But having thoroughly dried wood is very important when it comes to having a very safe wood stove. A wood stove that is not smoking, doesn't have a bunch of creosote growing up in it and making it very dangerous for you and your family. So if you haven't seen our video on wood stoves, learning about the EPA 2020 guidelines and what this means for people with their wood stoves, what it means for people in a regular house versus in a mobile home, or some of the legalities of wood stoves, check this out right here. It's very, very interesting information. God bless and have a fantastic day.